Hi, this is Mr. Raincourt.
And Mrs. Shelton.
And we're back, and we are going to do Activity 6. Activity 6 is very similar to some of the previous ones in the sense that you're just reading, and then once you get to the end of the section, you're going to answer the stopping to think questions. So what I'll do is I'll read, and then we'll get to the stopping to think question. I'll read it out loud to you, and then you're going to pause and answer it in your own sheet, okay? Here we go. So I'm on activity 6. If you're in the book, the regular book, it's page 31, but on here it's page 42 on the LabAIDS website. Activity 6, Mendel, first geneticist. The study of genes, called genetics, began with an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel, who studied the genetics of pea plants in the 1860s. Based on the results of his experiments, Mendel proposed a model for how organisms inherit traits from their parents. He discovered the behavior of genes 40 years before scientists learned where genes are located in the cell, and almost 100 years before scientists discovered what genes are actually made of. In this activity, you will investigate some of Mendel's results and how he analyzed his results to come up with an explanation for inheritance of traits. You will also compare Mendel's models with your own model in the gene combo activity. So the guiding question or the purpose of this activity is what causes the patterns that can be observed when two parents with different traits have offspring. As you read, you're going to answer the stopping to think questions as instructed by us, like we just told you a second ago. And here we go with the reading in part A.
Okay, part A, Mendel's life. In 1865, Gregor Mendel published his work on the behavior of genes. Mendel lived in a monastery that was devoted to teaching and science, as well as religious matters. Mendel had prepared to be a science teacher and had studied math, botany, and plant breeding for several years. The monastery had an experimental garden for agricultural research. Research then, as now, including crossbreeding varieties of plants and animals in order to produce superior food and other plants. Mendel became increasingly interested in the pea plants he was working on. He wondered how the colors, shapes, and heights of offspring pea plants were related to those of the parent plants. He began a careful study of how characteristics are inherited in pea plants. Mendel's discoveries depended upon research about breeding plants, careful experiments, and creative thinking about how to explain the evidence he collected. He understood that plant seeds are produced by sexual reproduction. He also understood the mathematics of probability. Mendel deliberately crossed specific parent plants to produce and study the traits of the offspring. His experiments were planned so carefully and recorded so thoroughly that anyone could repeat his procedure and confirm his findings. The patterns he discovered applied to all sexually reproducing organisms, from petunias to peas, from earthworms to humans. His discoveries of helped people answer questions ranging from how to produce disease-resistant food crops to explaining human diseases such as cystic fibrosis and sickle cell disease. At this time, we're going to ask you to answer stopping to think question number 1. Stopping to think question 1 asks this: what personal qualities and experiences do you think helped Mendel in his work? Please pause the video now and respond to stopping to think question number 1.
Okay, so by now you should have answered stopping to think question 1. Okay, so we're still on page 43, and I'm going to continue with part B. Read along with me, please. Part B, Mendel's experiments with pea plants. Plants in general, and pea plants in particular, were excellent organisms for Mendel to study for the following reasons. Number 1, they grow into mature plants very quickly. In about 60 to 80 days, their seeds grow and develop into mature plants. So rather than monitoring and studying humans, he decided to use something that reproduced in less time. Pea plants do that. Remember, humans take 9 months to reproduce or to have a baby after reproducing. Number 2, they produce many seeds rapidly, so he didn't have to wait long to get those seeds. Step 3, they have many observable characteristics that come in just 2 alternatives, such as purple or white flowers or yellow and green pods, with no blending of these traits, so no lavender flowers and no yellowish or green pods. Wait 1 second. We're flipping the page. I think you have to zoom longer, more. We got it. We got it.
No, it's missing.
What did it do? Here we can go to page 44 right here. There we go.
Perfect. Technical difficulties, folks. Technical. Oh, where am I? Go ahead, Mr.
We're being
Rickler.
so silly right now. Okay, so Mendel decided to bring extremely large numbers of pea plants and search for simple patterns in the offspring. The table above, so this table right here, shows the results he obtained for 4 of the characteristics he studied. Mendel did hundreds of crosses and observed and counted the offspring's traits for thousands of pea seeds, pods, and flowers. He then analyzed the results and applied his knowledge of statistics and probability to infer the behavior of the individual genes. So you'll notice he did 4 traits here. He studied flower color, seed surface, and pod color. Okay. And then he produced 3 generations. Stopping to think question 2 says this. There's 2 parts. Part A, what were the advantages of Mendel in using pea plants for his breeding experiments? In other words, why did he choose pea plants instead of humans? Think about that. We talked about first when I first started reading. Then, stopping to think question 2B says, why did Mendel perform so many crosses for the same characteristics? So right now you're going to stop and answer the stopping to think questions 2A and 2B. And then when you're done, please hit pause and we'll do the rest. Hit it, Dolores.
Okay, we're back. So you should have just now completed Stopping to Think 3, parts A and B. At this time, we're going to continue reading. Please follow along as I read aloud with you. As he looked at the data, Mendel noticed an interesting pattern. If he calculated the ratio of the 2 traits in the 3rd generation, he obtained a ratio very near 3 to 1. Where have you seen a 3 to 1 ratio previously? For example, for seed color, the ratio of yellow to green seeds can be calculated as, and if you take a look there, you'll notice that he had 6,022 yellow versus 2,001 green. And when you calculate that, you end up with basically a 3 to 1 ratio of yellow to green. This is almost exactly a 3 to 1 ratio of yellow to green. This means that for every 1 green seeded plant, there were almost exactly 3 yellow seeded plants in the 3rd generation. You could also express this in terms of a fraction, 3/4 yellow and 1/4 green, as shown in the pie graph at the right. So take a look at this pie graph. You'll notice that 3/4 of the pie graph are yellow and only 1 of them happen to be green. Okay, let's try and turn this page, Mr. Rancourt.
I'm going to do it the way that's quickest, and I know how.
That makes sense. All right, continue reading along. Mendel concluded that not only did the green seeded trait reappear in the 3rd generation, didn't the orange tail trait reappear in the 3rd generation of Sky and Poppy's offspring? But the probability of a 3rd generation plant having that trait was 1/4. That is about 1 green seeded plant for every 4 plants produced overall. He found the same ratio with several other characteristics. The 3 to 1 ratio he found for all of these different characteristics was the clue to how parents' genes combine in their offspring. Based on his analysis, he proposed the following. First, each trait that appears in the 2nd generation is the dominant version of the characteristic.
Have we heard that already?
I believe we have. The trait that is hidden is called recessive. So when we think back to the critter tails, remember the blue is our dominant trait and the orange is our recessive trait. The second thing he said is this. Every plant has 2 copies of the gene for each characteristic. These 2 copies are called alleles. Remember, those are different versions of a gene. The evidence suggested there was more than 1 copy of a gene for each characteristic in each plant. So the simplest assumption that would work was to have 2 alleles or copies per characteristic. And the last thing he said was each pea plant receives only 1 allele for each characteristic from each parent and ends up with 2 alleles of its own. In other words, each parent gives 1 allele for that particular characteristic, or you get half of your genes from one parent and half from the other. He then used these ideas to argue that the 3-to-1 ratio is exactly what is expected in the 3rd generation for every plant characteristic. In earlier activities, you explored this proposal using discs and coins as models for genes. At this point in time, we're going to ask that you respond to stopping to think questions on your analysis document. Stopping to think question 3 has 2 parts. In the first part, I'd like you to explain how the model using coin tosses in the activity gene combo, which was activity 4, compares with Mendel's explanation for his results. So think about this, okay? When we looked at the model for coin tosses, we ended up with a 3-to-1 ratio, or 3/4 blue tail color and 1/4 orange tail color. How does that add up, or how does that compare with what Mendel discovered with his pea plants? And in the second part, part B, it states, people often think of mathematics as important in physics and chemistry, but it is also important in many fields of life science, such as biology. Explain how Mendel used mathematics in his work. So guys, think about ratios. Think about how we are able to calculate ratios using the data that we have collected, and not just individual data, but also data as a class, okay? And explain how Mendel used mathematics with his pea plants, okay? That, at this time, I'd like you to stop and pause activity, or stop and pause and complete stopping to think number 3, parts A and B.
All right, so we're back. So you just answered stopping to think questions 3, and I'm at the bottom of page 45, getting ready to finish 45 and then go on to 46. Okay, so I'm right here. If you look at my cursor, that says Mendel published. So Mendel published his results in a paper that was mostly ignored at the time. Scientists and breeders failed to understand what he had done. Never before had someone used mathematics to tackle a complex biological problem. Mendel's work was rediscovered and understood only after scientists realized that genes must be located on the chromosomes found in the nucleus of the cell. So he spent all of his life studying genetics, and people didn't recognize that he actually did a good job with it, and that he actually helped them discover more things long after his death. And that's typical about most scientists. Most scientists actually aren't rewarded until after their death. So you will learn about chromosomes in the activity titled Show Me the Genes. So the next thing that you're going to do after you answer the stopping to think questions 1, 2, and 3 is you're going to do your analysis questions 1 through 5. And you're going to answer those in the exact same document that you are answering your stopping to think questions. If you have any questions, make sure that you see Mrs. Shelton or I. Have a great day.